Today is Sunday, April 9th, 2017, and this is the beginning of an interview with Summer Glen at the Summer Glen Golf Community. My name is Joseph Asen, and I will be the interviewer. Also present is Sam Krokowski, who will operate the video. So, could you tell us your full name and address?
Michael Francis Desmond. And what was that?
And your address?
Ocala, Florida, 34473.
Where and when were you born, and how old are you today?
I was born on the 29th of February, 1952. So that either makes me 16 3/4 or 65. So I'm 65.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father was Bernard Desmond. He worked for Chrysler for all his life, 25, 30 years. My mother's name is Rosemary Desmond. She was a registered nurse.
Did you have any siblings? And
Yes.
if so, what were their names?
My oldest sister, Julie Desmond. Second sister's Pat. My brother, Tim. My third sister, Chris. And I had a fourth sister, Kathleen, who drowned back in the 80s.
Did any siblings serve in the military?
My sister, Julie, was in the Army, and she retired as a reserve colonel.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
High school. Came in the service right out of high school.
When did you enter the service?
1970, August 26, 1970.
And which branch of service did you serve?
The Air Force.
Did you enlist or were you drafted?
I've done both. I enlisted. 6 months later, I got drafted.
If you enlisted, why did you choose that specific branch of the military?
Well, I had, between my junior and senior year in high school, I had gotten accepted at the University of Detroit, applied for financial aid, got $100. So knew that wasn't enough. And I had visited all the recruiters. This was 1969, so Vietnam was going on, and being drafted was a real possibility. So I went and saw the Army recruiter, the Marine recruiter, the Navy recruiter, the Air Force recruiter, and I felt that the Air Force recruiter was the most honest with me. So when it came time, I decided to go in the Air Force.
What was your rank?
I retired as a Chief Master Sergeant.
And where did you serve?
Let's see, my first assignment was in Fuchu Air Station, Japan, 1971 to 1974. Then I spent 15 months up at KI Sawyer Air Force Base in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Then went to Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska, where I spent 5 years. It was a great assignment. Then I spent the rest of my career in the Northern Virginia area, working in intelligence. So,
Can you describe basic training?
I tell people, because of my Catholic upbringing, basic training was a snap. It was really easy. Good old nuns had taught me how to march and take orders and follow discipline. So it was 8 weeks, 8 or 9 weeks, but it was an interesting time, but not as difficult as going to Catholic schools.
Where did you receive your basic training?
Backland Air Force Base in Texas.
What weapons did you qualify on during basic training?
None. I went to the Air Force.
Do you recall your instructors? And if you do, what were they like?
I do recall them. I don't necessarily remember their names, but the chief instructor reminded me a lot about my dad. He was a quiet person. when he spoke, you listened to him. And the assistant TI reminded me of my mother. He yelled and screamed a lot. But they were good at what they did. And they did a good job of getting us ready to transition into the Air Force.
Did you receive any special training?
No, not really.
What qualification level did you achieve?
I don't understand what you mean by that.
Yeah, just skip the question.
How did you adapt to military life?
Military life to me was very easy. Like I said, I had spent 8 years in Catholic schools, and I actually went to the seminary for 1 year. So military discipline was very easy for me to transition into. In my first assignment over to Fuchu Air Station, Japan, was there's actually 21 of us went over there, and a vast majority, it was the first time we were away from home. So my first 3 years in the Air Force was really an easy transition.
Were you married or single at the time?
I was single.
What do you recall about the barracks, the regiment food, or the social life during that time?
Best thing I had before I got married was my meal card. You didn't have to worry about, where you're going to get your next meal, where you're going to get food. Barracks life was a blast. It was overseas, and it was during time of Vietnam. So I think that in my experience over the 24 years, I always look back at that as that the Air Force, if not the military altogether, was tired. They were stretched out. They were basically mentally tired from their experience in Vietnam. So I say all that because discipline and structure were a little bit laxed. As long as you showed up, did your job, they didn't really monitor or care what you did after hours. And that all changed when I came back overseas and we got out of the service. I'm not the service, I'm sorry, Vietnam.
Where did you serve?
As I said, I served in, my first assignment was in Fuchu and then Michigan and back up to Alaska for 5 years. And the rest of it was mostly done in Northern Virginia. I had an 18-month period at Scott Air Force Base in Illinois.
Were you part of any specific operations?
Yes, I was. Can't really say anything.
And how long were you overseas?
I was overseas. Ironically, they considered Alaska an overseas assignment. So I was, out of the 24 years, I spent 8 years overseas. Did a lot of TDYs overseas, but
What does TDY mean?
temporary duty assignment.
What are some memories of going overseas?
Well, since Fuchu was right after basic training, and I'm 19 years old, and I'm going on the other side of the world, and for the most part, I never left the Michigan area. And as I said, there was 21 of us that were between the ages of 19 and 21. And we went, Fuchu was a very small air station. It was the home of 5th Air Force headquarters. So during the day, there was a lot of generals and colonels and officers around. But at nighttime, it was just us. And there were 12 or 13 barracks of 100 men, young boys, that were all alone. So we kind of did some crazy things. But it was a great assignment. It was the beginning of my career. and I enjoyed it. And the friends I made there are my friends this year. I mean, to this day.
What did you do like for recreation when you were over there?
Softball, basketball, flag football, drinking. You know, yeah. So, but yeah, and going. We're in Japan, so we went to Tokyo a lot and we did some sightseeing. But for the most part, it was the intramurals and the intramural programs. Again, there was, after duty hours, there was no ladies on the station. There was nothing to do, unless you took the bus to one of the bigger bases. So we got all together into the sports, and again, we were very fortunate. I mean, it was just an uncanny gift of young boys that were athletically inclined. We ruled the softball team, the football team, not the basketball team, but it was a great time.
How did you travel there?
Obviously, the Air Force put us on a plane. It was actually a commercial plane, so it wasn't a military transport.
How did you stay in contact with family back home?
My career field was communications, so we had because it was 5th Air Force headquarters, we had every conceivable communication capability you had at that time. So one of the things we would do after work is we'd go and man the switchboard. And part of that reason is because we could call home and hook up with a base in the United States, and they would transfer the call to our homes.
Did you get enough sleep?
Some days.
What kind of friendships did you form while serving?
Lifelong friendships. As I said, the guys I met in Japan, one was my best man at my wedding, and the rest of them made up the grooms, and we stayed in touch. And then as we grew older and I moved around, I really became good friends with 4 chaplains that I am still in contact with today.
Did you admire the people you served with?
Yes. 95, 90, there's always a few that. But I did. Again, when I went in 1970, you still saw the elderly men and women were World War II vets, Korean vets, and Vietnam vets. So there was a lot of respect for them.
Were you ever in combat?
No.
How did you feel about witnessing casualties or destruction?
Oh, since I was never in combat, I never saw that. The only times that I even came close, I was actually standing in line to go to Thailand. And my buddy, who's my best man, he was the last guy picked. I supported some Desert Storm and Shield activities in Grenada, but it was always, in a support function, not in direct.
Were you ever when you were in during Vietnam, were you ever shelled or under
No.
artillery fire or anything like that?
No. Now again, I was in Japan, so yeah. So.
What were your duties?
My career field was communication, so I learned how to use various different types of communications gear, but primarily I was in the Base Communications Center, which we back then we would type up all the messages that the 5th Air Force would send to the command. As I progressed in my career, I did some crypto work. Then I slid over into what I do today, cybersecurity. So I spent probably the last 10 years doing cybersecurity, but back then they called it information service. From 1980 on, so the last 15 years, I moved over, as I said, into the intelligence field. So we were a bunch of hand-picked people to do a specific job that was in what they called the black world. And most of that was just working for an organization called the National Reconnaissance Organization, where that's the primary spy agency for the United States. Well, from an imagery perspective.
Where were you when the war ended?
Which war?
Vietnam.
I was at Fuchu. Vietnam kind of there isn't really a cutoff date. It's kind of like a phase down. But when they signed the ceasefire, I was in Fuchu.
Did you admire your commanding officer?
Yes, I did. Yeah, actually, more my first sergeant than the commanding officer. He was our first sergeant. He was, ironically, an ex-Marine. He had served in the Marine Corps, and he was tough as nails, which a bunch of young 19-year-old kids needed a tough guy to whip us into shape. So,
what are your most memorable experiences?
Meeting my wife, and I met her in Japan. She's from Wisconsin, and that was just unbelievable. We've been married for 44 years, and we only knew each other for like 4 months. So, before I proposed. But from a military perspective, my 15 years working in the intelligence community supporting the NRO, there were a lot of things that we did, again, I can't really go into them, that were just unbelievable. I was given responsibilities at a relatively young age, both age-wise and rank-wise, because I was in that organization. As I said earlier, we were all handpicked, and he just worked with an unbelievable bunch of people. I sat in a meeting in 1982 or 1983, and I had no business being in that meeting, even though I was invited, and I sat with some of the most brilliant minds. The purpose of that meeting is, what were we going to do in 2050? And these guys are just unbelievable. And what's really amazing for me is the things they talked about is where we are today. The technology advances, where they saw the future, especially, we're talking about satellites, and a lot of things that we have today that we use in everyday life came out of our technologies for advancement in satellite capability. Especially getting smaller and smaller. So that to me was just mind blowing. I mean, that's what 35 years ago, and it's like I'm still sitting in that room. That's how much of an impact it was for me.
When did you return home?
Well, I came from Fuchu. It was 1974, February '74, and then from Alaska it was September of '80. Those are the only two times that I was overseas.
How were you received by your family and your community?
I came from a small farming community, so my dad, my mom, my dad obviously was a World War II vet. My mom went through World War II, so they had a healthy respect for the military. And my sister, as I said, went in the Army, and I went in the Air Force. And since it was such a small farming community, everybody knew everybody. So, and like everybody else, between 1965 to 1973, community sent its fair share of people to Vietnam. So, and obviously a small community is going to be close-knit and tight rather than a big city.
So they're a lot more welcoming.
Not in the sense of what you're thinking today. Okay. Part of it was, hey, Mike's home. John's home. And everybody would go. There wasn't a lot of places to go, so you just went to the VFW hall and just met with the other vets in the Lions Club, with the city or town, and with the Catholics it would be the Knights of Columbus. So you don't necessarily see those small, kind of like Summerlin is like a small community. There's a lot of vets here, so it's kind of like this.
How did you adjust to civilian life?
Very easily, because I just took my uniform off and went right back to the same office, and worked as a contractor. I still do the same thing today I did back then, just a different advancement of it. And because I stayed in the defense industry, I stayed around the military. So it was an easy transition.
What have you done since leaving the military?
As I said, I've continued doing the same type of work. Cybersecurity is just an unbelievable field, and I tell a lot of people that just about every morning I wake up, look at myself in the mirror, and say, "Do you know what you're doing?" And the answer is no. I don't know what I'm doing. It's whatever we fixed yesterday is probably broken today. So it's a constant battle to try to stay ahead of things. I'm not a very technical person. My line of work has always been policy requirements, that type of stuff. I can give you an idea how to fix your computer, but don't ask me to sit down and fix it for you. I'm just like you. Have to call the computer guy. But it was a great, and I think the one thing that, as I said, my wife and I met over in Japan, and we got married a year later. She had actually left Japan 6 months before I did, and we were young, thought we knew everything and owned the world, and I was doing really well in the Air Force. And then, we received the shock of our life. Our daughter Tanya died. And what a wake-up call. And both my wife and I had good, solid backgrounds, mine in Catholicism, and she was a Lutheran, but we weren't really living the way we were supposed to. We weren't really following with God. So the one thing that has been a constant and a continuing growing is our relationship with God. He's the cornerstone of our life and has been, pretty much since the day Tanya died.
Has your military service impacted your feelings about war or the military?
I'm not in favor of us being the police of the world. That time's past. We need to adjust to the fact that it's a global world now. All the technology. It's so much easier to communicate with other people. It's so much easier to obtain information. So it's harder to manage that information appropriately. I have supported the activities that we've done since I've joined the military. I loved Ronald Reagan. I thought that, at least in my lifetime, unless somebody comes up, in the future, he's the greatest president that I served under, and I think he changed the course of the military in America. I have a personal belief that the reason that America is so supportive of the military now is because those in leadership position are the Vietnam vets, and they remember the way they were treated. But that's just my opinion.
How did your wartime experiences affect your life?
Again, I wasn't in a war zone, but the support I gave helped me understand that you need to have a mission, an objective, and you need to know how to attain those objectives and those mission goals. I was very fortunate. I was never in harm's way, but the data and the job I did supported people that had to go into combat zones.
Did you or someone you know have post-traumatic stress?
I obviously didn't, and I haven't really known anybody that. Not, they have name tags for things now. So I don't really know that if I knew someone that was going through that.
What effect did serving in the military have on your faith or spirituality?
Oh, a lot. As I said, I met my wife when she was 16, married her when she was 17, and Tanya died when she was 18. So that was a huge event in our life, and it made us stop playing at being a Christian and actually be a Christian. We struggled because neither one of us was getting what we thought we needed from the Catholic Church and the Lutheran Church. We're non-denominational today, but again, the network that the military provides you, to rally around us at the time to help us through that stage was incredible. We very shortly after that happened May of '75, and by September of '75 we were up in Alaska, and we met Chaplain Cook and his wife Marty, who basically took us under our wing and helped us through that time.
Are you a member of any veterans organization?
No, just Summer Glen.
Have you remained in contact with or reunited with any fellow veterans?
Yes. As I said, the guys that I was stationed with in Fuchu, they were my groomsmen and best men, and we actually lost touch for about 25 years, and then we got reunited, and we talk to them, email them, and go see them every once in a while. Then the people that I met along the way, we've stayed in touch with, and as I said, when I retired and just went right back to the same job, I stayed close to those people.
What are some life lessons you learned in the military?
To be honest, your integrity is the most important thing that you have outside of your faith. You were, or I should say, I was in charge of a number of people in my career, and it was important for me to be honest with them. It was important for me to respect them because I was asking them to do certain things. When Desert Storm broke out, I was in a conference call where I basically ordered a group of soldiers to go to Saudi Arabia. Yeah, and I did it in such a matter-of-fact way because that's the way I was trained. But later that night, it was like, my gosh, who am I to tell those people to go in harm's way? So honesty, integrity, respect are key.
What lessons would you like to pass on to today's generation?
Same thing. I can't overstate how important it is to have integrity. Your word is your bond. Your word is the only thing that you have to offer someone. If they don't believe you, if they can't trust you, then you're no good to them.
Is there anything I forgot to ask about your military experience?
No, not really. For the scope of this interview, I had a great time. 24 years. The only reason we retired when we retired, it was time. Not from a military perspective, but from a family perspective. Both my children were headed for college. So it was going to come down to me and my wife again, and it was time to settle down and make that transition.
Well, that was an interview. Thank you for your time, sir.
All right, thank you.